Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the EcoHitch Trailer Hitch receiver on a 2018 BMW X5. Now this is going to be an interesting trailer hitch, not because of the way it installs or anything like that, but it does have a cool feature. This is a removable 2" by 2" receiver tube opening, and in order to do that there is going to be a bolt that runs across the top. But it's a really nice option to have a really good weight capacity on a hitch, but also you can retain that OEM clean look if that's what you're going for. Regardless if you have the receiver tube in and attached or have it removed, the rest of the hitch is completely hidden. So being that it bolts up to where the bumper impact beam is normally located means that you get a super clean look and also a very good structurally mounted hitch. As I mentioned before, this is a 2" by 2" receiver tube opening, and that's going to be a great option for a ton of different accessories. This is kind of the standard size you see on most trailer hitches. So when it comes to ball mounts, bike racks, or cargo carriers, tons of options are available. All of them are going to stay in place with a 5/8 pin and clip. This is not included with the hitch, but a lot of times when you get accessories, they'll have those included. And if you plan on leaving your accessories on the back of your BMW, you might want to look at a locking pin and clip so you can lock that in place and know that no one's going to walk away with your accessories. The safety chains are also hidden. They're a little bit tucked up, but that's not a bad thing because if you are planning on towing a trailer, there's a large opening that allows for a standard S-hook or even a larger clevis style will go onto the safety chain loop. Now, it does want to rub a little bit against the bottom fascia opening here, but I'm not too concerned that it's going to cause any issue long term. And speaking of towing, this actually has some pretty good weight capacities. So out of the box, the gross trailer weight rating is going to be 5,000 pounds, which is going to be the weight of the trailer plus the accessories loaded onto it. So pretty good overall capacity there. The tongue weight rating is 750 pounds, and that's a good amount. That's going to be the downward pressure on the inside of the receiver tube opening. So not only when pulling a trailer, but mostly this comes down to weight capacities of your cargo carriers and bike racks. With 750 pounds, you could load this thing up with a 4-bike rack, and I don't see any issues happening. So really good numbers out the gate, but also if you are planning on pulling a trailer, check the owner's manual to see what it's capable of towing and then compare that with the hitch and just take the lower number to make sure that you're not overloading anything. This is also a good time if you are picking up a hitch and you plan on pulling a trailer, you might want to get some 4-pole wiring. We'll be installing that a little bit later on here as it uses a universal CURT system. Now, if you're choosing accessories brand new or you're picking up some used ones, maybe you have them already, bike racks and cargo carriers many times will have a storage that is in a vertical position, and you want to make sure that you're able to utilize that. Not all vehicles you can, and it's really dependent on how far back the hitch sits. So measuring from the center of our hitch pin hole to the furthest point of our fascia, it's right at about 3 inches, a little under. So I really don't worry that you're going to have any issues with those components. Just keep in mind in that stowed position, it may block your license plate and your rear view camera, and you're probably going to have to fold it down to be able to open up your hatch, but that's pretty standard when those are in the stowed position. Now, as far as ground clearance goes, this one's pretty good. It's going to be coming in at 13.5 inches, which is going to be mostly important for choosing a ball mount. So you can take that measurement and then measure the coupler on your trailer, and between the difference, you can determine the rise or drop necessary for your ball mount to get your trailer nice and level. Something else to keep in mind, that ground clearance is pretty good, but as you have extended accessories, your cargo carriers and bike racks, they extend the length of the vehicle. So as you go up steep inclines or any large bumps or things along those nature, just keep that in mind. You don't want your things to bottom out. So really not going straight up a hill or anything along those lines is going to be key. It's pretty decent overall ground clearance, but the potential is still definitely there on some extreme cases. In terms of installation, this is not one of the easier hitches to do. Unfortunately, BMWs are very well built, and that's not the unfortunate part. The hard part is when you're pulling things apart to install things, there's a decent amount of hardware that you're going to be taking off, and it's a little bit different than traditional American or Japanese cars, but it's not terribly hard to do on here. The hard, tricky part that we've run into here at eTrailer on many of these is going to be the reflectors. The instructions are going to tell you pretty, in bold that it's going to be a fragile piece, and that is very true. So this is definitely one, just take your time. You will probably need an extra set of hands, and you're going to be pulling off this fascia to get it installed. It is going to replace your bumper beam, so you will have an extra bumper beam to do whatever you want with. But overall, this is pretty heavy duty. It's really cool that you can remove the receiver tube opening, so it is a great option for a vehicle like this. But if you watch the video and you decide maybe it's beyond your scope, maybe it's something you don't want to do, maybe you don't have the tools or the space to do it, you can use eTrailer's dealer locator to find someone close to you to get this hitch installed. But for you DIYers that are going to be doing this yourself, follow along with me. I have plenty of tips and tricks. I've done plenty of these, and we'll make this somewhat difficult hitch install as easy as possible. So let's take a look at that. To begin our installation of our hitch, we're going to want to go to each of our wheel wells, and a lot of the steps that we'll be doing, we'll be repeating on the other side, and I'll make sure to let you know that. Now, we're going to be focusing on 5 different points on the wheel well, and the first is going to be 3 plastic push pins that we want to remove. You'll find that there's going to be 3 of them. There's one that's located a little further in, one at the corner, and then one in this kind of knocked out portion of the wheel well. To get these removed, I'm using a trim panel tool, which makes this a little bit easier, but a flathead screwdriver also works pretty well. So if you pry out the center, a lot of times you can go from the back side of the entire plastic push pin and get it removed. If not, you can just remove the center, and a lot of times once you kind of just pull on the fender liner, it'll pop out, or you can pry it out. Either way, just make sure that you're holding on to these. And something I'll point out is as we remove hardware off this vehicle, having a nice organized spot to keep everything we took off is going to make it a lot easier for reinstallation. So we'll start by getting those 3 removed first. Now the other attachment points that we're going to be tackling are going to be these 2 rivets, and as they're riveted in, there's no salvaging these. We do have new rivets that come in the kit that we'll be putting on later. But we do need to get these removed so we can peel back this wheel well liner or the trim here. And to get these rivets out, there's a few different ways you can do it. If you can pry this out a little bit, take a pair of side cutters and cut it. There is metal in there that makes it a little more strong. So if you have a drill bit, and you got to be careful here just because there's not a whole lot of space. So I have a right angle drill, but if you have a long enough drill bit that you can gain access to the middle portion, drilling this out definitely helps. And as you kind of work it through the center, it should generally come out with the drill bit, but with that portion drilled out, I'm going to see if I can't pry this off. And a lot of times it will come off with the drill bit, but if not, you can kind of put the pressure on this, and then if you need to, you can also enlarge that hole that you drilled. So you can see, that's the main thing, is as long as we get that portion taken off. So I'll get this drilled out, and then we're just going to repeat the same steps on the other side. Now, something that I'll point out that I probably need to apologize for is I mentioned rivets throughout. We drilled those ones out, and in the kit is actually push pin fasteners to replace the rivets, which is kind of nice because you won't have to use a rivet gun to get them attached. But keep in mind, since we drilled that top one out, we will be short one. It's really not going to cause any structural issues, but if you are wanting to replace that, you can generally find these performance tools. We have kits available for plastic push pins. You can generally find these at local auto parts stores if you really want to replace them. They're a little bit tough, I guess you'd say, as far as pressure to get them through. So make sure that if you did drill it out, that everything's cleared out, otherwise it's not going to feed in. And you can use your hand, but if it does give you resistance, take either a block of wood or a larger surface that you can press on and just push it in straight until it's popped in. So no rivets, but that's actually kind of a benefit. Again, just it's going to make it a little bit easier. Now underneath there's also going to be a screw that's located on the bottom portion of the fascia. It's an 8mm socket to get that taken out. Now we'll be peeling back the wheel well trim, and that's going to give us access to hardware that's located here that's attaching the fascia. So I recommend peel back the wheel well liner a little bit here. It's still attached with this rivet up here, so as long as we get a little bit of room here, and that's so we can pop this portion out. So these clips are notoriously tricky. What I'd recommend doing is if you can reach back here, push on the tab, start at the bottom and then work your way up. So it's a lot easier to do from the inside rather than the outside. So as I pop this out, I'll show you what that clip looks like behind there. if you can't get this top one, I couldn't really get a hand on it. If you have a plastic trim tool, something similar to this, if you have an old credit card or a gift card or something, it's also not a bad way to just wedge that in here along where that clip is. And if you want, you can put a little painter's tape here to help protect it, but this is gonna pop that clip out. It's located right here and make it a little bit easier for us. So this is what the clips look like, and so as I reach back on the portion behind here, I'm just pushing that tab down and then pulling it back. Now be careful with this plastic trim. If you pull it back too much and you crease it, it will leave a permanent mark on here. So just take your time. These two, pretty easy. This top one's a little bit tight here, and partially I think that's because of the rivet that's still located here, and as much as I want to drill that out, we only have 4 of them total in the kit to put them back up, so I want to make sure that we can obviously have all of our hardware back in place. But really what we're looking for is to have it out at this point, and that's going to give us access to, you'll see the 8mm screw here. I might recommend a ratcheting wrench to get to that. We'll be pulling that off, and so I'll go grab my wrench right now and get that taken down. Now also located where the bottom trim of the fascia is going to be this T25 screw. So with that Torx bit, we'll get that removed. And then just make sure that you repeat on the other side and get to this step. Now this is the portion where we've had plenty of BMW X5s come in different years are a little bit different, but when it comes to removing these reflectors, these are very brittle. In fact, we have extra ones here because the chances of them breaking are pretty high. The reason being, the design of them is very interesting. So this locking tab, this is from the driver's side. It's going to be very similar to this though. It locks in. There's a snap that's here. You can see where we'll press there. And then there's this metal tab. So the goal is to reach up, push the metal tab to slowly get this out, work on this. The problem is as you put it at this angle, this corner piece does kind of start to dig into the fascia, and that's where we're going to see issues where generally if it breaks, it's going to be along here. So things that you might want to do, if you have some soapy water, spray it along this whole thing. It'll help loosen it up a little bit. You can put a little bit of painter's tape along here, but honestly, I've done this quite a bit and I still managed to break these. It really comes down to just be careful, and if you do break it, don't worry, they're not very expensive to replace, but this is kind of the nuance of removing the fascia of this vehicle. So as I mentioned, we are going to go from the back side to get this removed. Obviously make sure your car's cooled down so you're not grabbing any exhaust pipes that are hot, but reach up and you can feel the metal clip, and as you push that, you can see this slowly start to come out. Don't push too hard. You just want to keep it loose, and as we work our way down to the next clip, we'll slowly get it out, and then we'll be able to pull it out straight. So with 2 hands on here, I'm going to just kind of hold this in place, that clip, push that up, and again, just take your time here. So even at this point when it's loose, this is where a lot of times you think you're home free and it'll crack. Just be very careful and then pull this straight out. The reason we remove those reflectors is going to be the 8mm screw that's attached. It's going to attach the fascia to a structural part of the vehicle, so we'll go ahead and get those removed on both sides. Now there's also going to be hardware that attaches the fascia that's right underneath the taillight. So we do need to take the taillights out, and if you've never done that on your BMW, it's not too terribly hard to do. As you open up your hatch, drop your tailgate, you're going to want to remove the panels that are located near the taillight pockets. You just pull those back. So we'll do that on both sides. With the panel taken out, we're going to unplug our taillight. There's just a small tab that you'll push on the taillight to get this separated, and that's going to allow us to peel back the liner. And there's going to be just these 2 studs here that are holding in the taillight. So we're going to go ahead and get those removed. It looks to be an 8mm socket to accomplish that. And be careful with these. I've had a few of them that drop into the abyss and they're really hard to find. So being that it's a fairly long stud, I would just loosen it and then get the rest with your fingers. To get the taillight removed, I would suggest this seal that goes on the inside portion. Sometimes this can, with dust and dirt, kind of just built up over time, cause a almost suction-like. So I would kind of work it around, just shake it a little bit. You can grab under here and pull, just be gentle. And then with your taillight, just kind of wiggle it around until you feel it become loose, and then you should be able to slide it straight out. And with the taillights taken out, you're going to have the 8mm screw, as I mentioned earlier, that attaches the fascia. So go ahead, you can take those out on both sides. The instructions don't mention it, but there's also going to be 4 screws on the bottom side of the fascia that we need to remove. Otherwise, this thing's not going to be coming off. So we'll get these taken off with an 8mm socket. Now, I really tried to salvage the rivets that we drilled out, as far as making sure we had enough to get it replaced when we put it all back. But the issue I'm running into is, as I'm getting ready to want to take the fascia off, it's still kind of interlocked in this fender, and I really don't want to cause any creasing, as I mentioned before. And so I think drilling out this rivet up top is going to be the best way to make sure that everything stays undamaged during the process. So I am going to end up drilling this out. We are going to be short a pop rivet, so that's a little unfortunate, but I think this is going to be a better route overall. And I think that's just enough we can pop off. There's an extra clip up here. It's slightly different than the others, but this allows us to at least peel back our fascia. It's real tight. You might be able to get away with that without taking that rivet off, but it's a little risky. But speaking of removing the fascia, now's a great time to have an extra set of hands, also a place to put the fascia while you're getting the hitch on. And you'll see this painter's tape. I run this on the seam of the fascia and then the rear quarter, and also on this trim. As things kind of move as we remove it and put it back on later, we want to make sure we're not scratching our paint in the process. This is a great, easy way to prevent that from happening. So with your extra set of hands, you'll just start on each corner and just kind of peel back, and pretty easily you can see it pops off. If you do need to, if it's getting hung up a little bit, you can see the tabs here. You'll just press on that. So a small flathead or a trim panel tool, just be careful obviously against the seams. You'll get each corner pulled back on each side, and then we'll work our way towards the middle. Now there is going to be an electrical connector on the passenger side, so don't pull the fascia completely off, and that's why it's helpful to have that extra set of hands to hold that while the other person unplugs it. So I'll get this side popped off, I'll get the other side, and then I'll show you how to get the center portion taken off. Now, as you get that portion along the fascia and quarter panel popped off, that's pretty easy, but you'll see that there's also clips by the taillight pocket. So this tab, if you push that down, that'll separate it. The same thing goes for here. And I do recommend just put a little bit of back pressure, so it'll pull it out. And that way we can get that out of the clips. Now, the tricky part on this one, it's not too bad, but on the center, there's a series of clips, and this is, your tailgate is kind of in the way of it. So you hold this up at a 45, and you'll see these clips are located right here. So what I like to do is just slowly pull back and keep pressure to where we can get to these clips to unhook them, but having that tension against it, just make sure that they don't re-snap in the process. So just take your time here, and sometimes to get it loose, grabbing on the lower portion where it goes into the wheel well liner, it's kind of attached there, so just kind of peel back on the fascia, work your way back, and then just keep this at the 45 to where you can get those clips taken out. There's also going to be clips that snap in along the vertical here by the strut on your tailgate. So what I'd recommend for that is, again, just kind of keep that pressure back, grab low, and then just kind of walk this back and forth. And if you can pull here on the fascia, and these clips should pop out. It's a little tricky. There we go. And As you can see, it took a little bit of pressure, but these clips are just snapped into here that are still holding it. So make sure you get those before working towards the center, and then that should make it easier for this to become removed. There we go. And those came out pretty quick, so I just pushed on the tab, grabbing below. This fascia fits really well, but also that means it's hard to take off. So just kind of work the top and bottom. And don't pull back too far, as I mentioned, because the wire that they have attached here is not very long. So we want to separate this. We'll just pinch on the top and bottom until we get our plug to pop out. I'm going to take this off the plastic clip. That'll give you a little bit of extra room here. There we go. And if it's really fighting you, if you have to, you can put a small flat blade screwdriver in there to kind of push up on those tabs. But with that removed, we'll set our fascia aside. Where we removed the electrical connection, I do recommend taking that off. It just slides onto this clip, so take that off because we're going to be pulling this plastic panel off. There's going to be 4 bolt locations or nut locations that we're going to be removing on each side. So you'll see them tucked in here and here and here. These are going to be a 10mm socket to accomplish that. So we'll get this side taken off and then repeat on the other side. With those nuts removed, we're going to remove both sides of this, and it's attached in the center portion with 2 clips. So there's one that's tucked back here. You can obviously see this one. Just pinch on these, and there's an alignment tab in the center. You should be able to pull this straight up, so get both sides removed. We're going to be removing our impact beam, and that's where our hitch is going to go. And it's just going to be 4 nuts on each side, and it's going to be an 18mm socket to accomplish that. But what I'm going to do first, this wire that goes to our impact beam, it's got this plastic clip that attaches it. So as we remove it, we want to make sure that, or as we remove the impact bar, we don't want to take the wiring with us. So just pop that off, and then we'll grab our socket and wrench. And we'll take these off and hold on to the nuts. So once you get the impact bar off, you can set that aside. It's not going to get reinstalled, but we are going to use the nuts. And something I'd recommend is you can take off 3 of them, loosen one of these up, and just leave it to where it's hand tightened off. But that'll hold it in place while you get the other side taken off, so that way it's not a bumper beam falling on you. The studs are fairly long, so I'm not too worried, but just a helpful tip. With the nuts removed, I'll just take our impact beam and slide this out. Now be careful, this wire is still kind of wrapped around. It's pretty tight. And you are going to need to open up the tailgate again to that kind of 45-degree angle. Just make sure you're not scratching your paint in the process. So we'll set this aside and then we'll grab our hitch. Now if you have that extra set of hands still nearby, you might want to ask them for help. This is a pretty heavy hitch. But really all we're doing is raising it up. Just have a nut ready on each side just to kind of get a few threads started again to hold that up. But it is pretty hefty. And also make sure you're not catching that wire. So I'm going to slide this on here. Get the wire out of the way. And also make sure it doesn't get sandwiched underneath the hitch. So I'm going to see if I can't get this pulled out around it a little bit. And then with that in place, get those nuts just hand started on each side, and then we can do the same for the rest of the hardware. We don't have to tighten this down yet, just make sure they're all in place because you'll see that these are slotted. That's going to allow for a little side-to-side adjustment. So once we have the hardware on, we're going to dial it in, make sure that it's centered up perfectly. Now something I see obviously after the fact is this wire. On the plastic that's located here, there is a tab where this wire was attached, and if you loosen that up before putting the hitch in place, it's really going to just open this up. The main thing is I don't want the wire to become damaged, whether by being pulled or smashed against it. So if you need that extra room, you can just undo it, just lift it up from that spot. There's also one here. So whatever you need to do to get that slack, it's definitely going to make it a little safer overall. So as I mentioned, we'll get this aligned. And if you look at the plastic, there's a center stud with a nut. I'm using that as my reference and just kind of make sure it's centered. It's going to be pretty close. So align it, a little left or right as necessary to get it exactly where you want it. And then at this point, we're going to snug this down with that 18mm socket. We are going to torque this down later, so no reason to get crazy here. We just want to make sure that it's held up in place. With those snug down, we are coming back with a torque wrench. The torque settings found in the instruction manual, and this is going to be an important step. Because we're using factory studs, you want to make sure that it's going to be tight enough, obviously, for the hitch to be able to be used and tow things, but also not too tight, putting stress on those studs that we have. So if you need a torque wrench, we have them available here at eTrailer. You can generally go to an auto parts store and rent one for free, but this will ensure that they're going to be properly torqued down. So we'll go through. We'll get all of these torqued down. So with our hitch torqued down properly, it might be a good time to also take a look at the bolt that has the receiver into the hitch. Double check that with the torque setting. If you plan on leaving this in, you'll have to torque that down each time you take it out. So now's a good time while you have the torque wrench to get that properly checked. And at this point, we can get everything put back in the reverse order. And once you have everything put back together, you got your taillights plugged back in, you've officially installed your hitch. All that's left to do is load up your accessories, put in your pin and clip, and hit the road. And that's going to do it for the installation and a look at the EcoHitch Torque Lift Trailer Hitch Receiver on a 2018 BMW X5.